Is the sound quite
It's
good?
all good. We've got a substantial number of RSVPs. Currently, we have 109 RSVPs for the session.
Great.
But obviously, we're hoping that they all make it Friday night. They haven't already all gone drinking at home because there's a.
No, I mean, Friday night online. No.
It's lunchtime in the Bay. I mean, don't everyone go drink? Doesn't what people do in the Bay Area drink at lunchtime?
Oh, lunchtime, morning, all the time, Grant. I'm having my no, I'm kidding. It's kombucha. Don't worry. I saw Bobby's face. I got a little nervous there.
No, we're good. Who else? You got your vodka and tomato juice there. I like it.
Hi there, Nadia. Welcome.
All right.
Hi there, Claire. Welcome.
Hey, people.
So shall we test the presentation capacity?
That would be great.
Or will everybody be logging on to this site? Is that right?
Yeah, they're going to be logging on to the same meeting that we're starting. Hi, Claire. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
We're just doing a little bit of testing that the presentation function's working, so bear with us, but we'll be getting started in 7 minutes here.
Can you see them?
Yes.
Can you see the slide transition?
Yes. There's a little bit of a delay, but I am seeing it.
Okay.
It's good. That's good.
Terrific.
Okie dokie.
That works. And Chad, how was your week during the pandemic?
The week during the pandemic?
Yeah.
Lots of nice little walks in the beautiful East Bay. It's not been too bad for me. It's been healthy. So you're in the city, San Francisco, is that right?
Yeah, I'm in San Francisco and also allowed to still get walks in nature. Although I think that they've now closed all the picnic benches and dog parks and other sort of small parts of the park and all the parking lots. So you're only allowed to walk to
I
it.
thought they were keeping those open.
Yeah, the parking lots are all closed now, but you're not allowed to drive to the park anymore in FF. So that is at least until the pandemic's over, they said. So that's been its own development. And how, Claire, how's the pandemic treating you?
I'll be right back.
Okay. Claire, how's the pandemic treating you? Sorry. All good.
Who else have we got in there? Nadia.
Hi, Nadia.
Huda on there?
Hi,
Scotty?
MC. No, not yet. But hi, Pauline. Hi, Nadia. Oh, hi, Claire.
Hi.
How are you this week, Claire?
I'm doing pretty good. San Francisco, so things are pretty quiet.
Yes, they are. I'm also in San Francisco, and things are quite quiet in the everybody order to stay at home. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It makes it more quiet. I see Lisa Bolton's arrived. Hi, Lisa. How's it going?
It's going good. It's just a little bit noisy here for a moment, so I'm going to go back on mute. Thank you.
Oh, all good. No worries. All good. And I see NC has joined. I'm not sure what that stands for, but hi, NC. Welcome. So I think that this is exciting that this has come together. How has y'all's Skoll World Forum been in terms of that part of the world? Have you enjoyed some of the sessions, Claire?
Yeah, I'm pretty impressed with how they transition to online. I really liked the ones that I attended.
I think it's kind of amazing that they made the transition as quickly and as relatively gracefully as happened. I mean, I think there's been so many interesting sessions this week that have come together of it. I also think it's fascinating that all the all these event ecosystems are likewise making the similar transition to online, and they're all doing it differently. So I think it's fascinating to understand. Hi, Luis. Hi, Louis. Or Luis, sorry. Excellent. Yeah, no, just that they've, and some of the sessions have been, yes, we are recording this, if that's what Louise is sharing. We are recording this because the session when it is going to start formally in 3 minutes, and so we're trying to get that ready. So thank you, Louise. Hi, Sanjay. Yes, we're recording this, and we're going to be having just so folks are familiar, we're going to have miniature recap, and then we're going to have an introduction of our guest speaker, and we're going to have the guest speaker, and then we've got presentations from some of the teams, and we're going to go through that too, and then discussion of the same. But I think it's been terrific to see the creativity overflowing on the Slack throughout the week, and I think it's exciting. Hi, Luis. Hi, Luis. And hi, Sanjay. Welcome, Sanjay. Hi, Lisa. Welcome.
Hi, Bobby.
Hello. Hello.
How's it going there?
All good, thank you.
Excellent. How's it going there, Sanjay?
Good, thanks.
Excellent. We're just.
Can we just ask everyone to please mute their mics if they're not talking? So
Yes, and we have Bruno here. Hi, Bruno. Welcome, Bruno. Terrific. Welcome, Bruno. Okay, Grant, we're getting close to official start time. So shall we begin? And I can do a 1 minute recap here, and then we can let you do are you ready to then do a intro for project our guest speaker, and then we can have the next phase of this. Grant, that sound good?
Sorry, I'm on mute. Can we just if we can we maybe put a few minutes, just a few more people to join?
Yeah, so then what I'm going to do is just do a recap for 2 minutes while folks are arriving, and then I'm going to hand it over to you to do an intro in 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, if that's all right, Grant. I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I'm with you. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
So recap in just 120 seconds of this context. Debt for Nature, we began the week with an integration of the history of that. There's been 40 years of that we've had discussions on throughout the week. And part of that history reflects an opportunity for the future if we got that to further scale. There's intersectionality of getting Debt for Nature to scale with climate change, because but biodiversity risks are also independent of climate change and intersecting and compounding of climate change risks. So there's part of why what we've looked at this week is under what circumstances can these social innovations reach scale? Under what circumstances can social innovations related to Debt for Nature, intersecting that as a thesis, get to scale? Because obviously our relationship with debt changes in the pandemic circumstance. Countries around the world are adopting a different opportunity, a different way to think about debt They're integrating awareness of new agency that they can have through debt, and they are securing a near-term future with that. We think there's ways for them to, for society to think about securing access to a biodiverse future over time through such, and that it's not only something that happens through the processes that have happened, but that there should be new levels of inclusion, creative collaboration with all kinds of stakeholders around the world who care about addressing these collective challenges. And so I think that part of that has been that we've had earlier in the week, we've had speakers on complexity of these challenges. We've had speakers on debt for nature specifically, and also speakers on conservation more broadly, regeneration, and not just sustainability, but how do we address the gaps. And if we think about how far we are behind in addressing so many of these challenges, it brings up how do we get more ambitious in catching up. And I think that's part of where it's been excellent to have our guest speaker here. So Grant, do you want to do a formal introduction of our guest speaker, and then we can proceed here?
That's great. Yeah, thank you very much. You can hear me, Bobby, all right?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. So tonight we're very proud from Sustainavistas and CrowdDoing to, first of all, to have you all here, and secondly, to have Chad Fishman, who's the Vice President and Research Director of Project Drawdown, which is a non-profit organization that assesses, maps, models, and communicates the world's most substantive solutions to global warming. Chad is a co-author, lead researcher, and the principal architect of the methodology and models behind the New Times bestseller Drawdown, the most comprehensive ever proposed to reverse global warming. In collaboration with a global team of
could you
researchers...
please mute we're getting feedback. Please mute your mic if you're able to listen, please. Thank you. Go ahead, Grant. My apologies.
No, that's a problem. So in collaboration with a global team of researchers and thought leaders, Chad designed the integrated models to assess the world's most effective climate solutions and determined if, when, and how the world can reach drawdown, the point in time when the concentration of atmospheric greenhouse gases begins to decline on a year-to-year basis. Drawdown was the #1 best-selling environmental book of 2017 and is currently being translated into over 10 languages. With a multidisciplinary background in public policy, human rights, sustainable development, and environmental conservation, Chad provides a systems-based approach to research and strategic leadership. Chad, can you take over, please? Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Grant and Bobby. And thank you all for joining us here today, from whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening. Those of you who are on the other side of the world and spending your Friday night chatting with us this evening, I'm really happy to have you and be able to speak a little bit about Project Drawdown. So I'm going to present my screen here, and just let me know if this is working. Do you see that screen?
No. Oh, yes. Now it's coming on.
There we
yes,
go.
Now I can see it.
So achieving drawdown. To jump right into it, some of you may have already heard of what drawdown is, and we just got a bit of a definition from Grant there. But for those of you who aren't really familiar with the project, drawdown is that point in time when atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases begins to decline on a year-to-year basis. It's when we take out more greenhouse gases than we actually put in to Earth's atmosphere. And the proposition is really quite simple. When we change the composition of greenhouse gas concentrations of the atmosphere, we can affect global cooling. Just as we are creating global warming effects due to the amount of emissions that are entering the atmosphere, we can have the reverse effect. We can actually stop global warming and begin the process of reversing it. But more than just a technical definition, drawdown is a new way of thinking about and acting on global warming. I like to think of it as that marker on the horizon pointing us towards the future that we actually want, a regenerative future where stopping and beginning to reverse global warming is actually possible with the solutions that exist today. Now, we're all really concerned about climate change, and we should be. It's the greatest challenge humanity has ever faced. We are in the midst of a COVID crisis, the COVID-19 virus, and it has dramatic impacts on our social and economic systems. And it's a drop in the bucket as to what we would experience if we don't do anything about climate change. Climate change is affecting us today. It's affecting our children tomorrow and our grandchildren and future generations to come. But climate change is really a symptom of a deeper sickness. It is a response of Earth's system telling us what's going on, and the system is actually working, right? And what it's telling us is that there is a sickness in our atmosphere that is affecting our terrestrial systems, affecting our oceans, our biodiversity, and our human economic and social systems. So how do we actually begin to stop this, stop global warming and begin reversing it? How do we solve the sickness and not simply treat the system, the symptoms? The only way we really know how is to draw down, to avoid putting greenhouse gases up and to pull down what's already there. Now, it sounds daunting. It may even sound impossible to some of you. But humanity, this is what's so great about our species, is that at times we are incredibly dumb. All right, let's be real. We're an incredibly dumb primate at times, but we are also incredibly brilliant. We are an amazing species that can and have created wonderful things on this planet, and at times have done really dumb things that have caused to destroy a lot of our planet. We have existing solutions, technologies and practices that are real, workable, tangible solutions that exist today. And when taken together, these solutions can achieve drawdown. Now, I want to ask you all to do something for me. It's a little bit hard. I usually do this when I'm in front of an audience, but given the COVID-19 crisis right now, we have to get used to these virtual settings. I'm going to ask you to do something for me. And just see how this goes. So I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and just think about, answering yes or no. We can't do it on the virtual, but I'm going to ask you a couple questions. I just want you to think about whether that's a yes or no in your mind. All right, so if you can all close your eyes wherever you are in the world today. I want you, if you can, to imagine a solar panel. Can you do that? Can you imagine going out and putting your hand on one of those panels? Now, you may not want to, but you can do it. Can you imagine going out and seeing a wind turbine? Maybe standing at the base of that wind turbine, putting your hand upon it, looking up and seeing the blades turn. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine walking on a hike in a protected forest, in a national forest? Can you imagine putting your arms around a tree? Can you feel that bark? Can you imagine going to a farm, organic farm? Can you smell the compost? What about a pasture? Can you see some cows on that pasture? Can you smell the manure? Can you imagine your favorite plate of pasta? Can you just about taste it? Can you smell it? Can you imagine that? Will it still taste delicious if there was no meat on that pasta? Can you imagine, this might be a little bit harder, can you imagine a circular economy? Can you put your hand on it? It's a bit hard. I'm not sure you can. Can you wrap your arms around sustainability? Can you smell regeneration? Can you taste it? Now I want you to imagine something else. Can you imagine the smile on a young child's face when he or she receives her diploma after 12 years of schooling? Can you give that child a hug? Now open up your eyes. Now what I wanted to walk you through here was, we need high-level thinking, big framework thought.
Quiero agregar muchas cosas, ¿no?
If we can ask you to mute.
A mí sí me gustan curses.
Yeah. That high-level frameworks that we really need, things like circular economy.
No.
We need
Otro.
regenerative and sustainable thinking. We need healthy growth, maybe degrowth. We need to think about these high-level concepts. It's important to have those frameworks. But for us to really take action on solutions, to implement solutions at all scales, we need to be able to imagine. We need to be able to touch, taste, smell, feel the solutions that exist today. And then and only then can we find the will to move farther and faster than we thought we needed to, because it's not a technology question. It's not a financial question. It's simply a matter of moving farther and faster. It's simply a matter of the will to move. But why don't we do this? One is that it's hard to imagine what those solutions are. And we've had a lot of trouble over the past 25 years actually understanding the real solutions that exist today. We've been entering into the silver bullet syndrome, right? Thinking about what is a future technology, a future practice that is going to be invented to solve the problem. Or sometimes you hear a buckshot of silver bullets. We don't need a buckshot. And frankly, I don't know why we are always using terminology or analogies comparing to violence, guns, and destroying, killing things, right? I mean, you can't cut that out of the language, right? Because we don't need the silver bullets. We don't need a buckshot of silver bullets. That's not going to work. We need an entire system of solutions being implemented together in parallel to achieve drawdown, to stop and begin reversing global warming, and to achieve that regenerative future that we actually want today. Now, how do we hear about global warming and climate change in the media today? We don't hear about what is possible. We don't hear about solutions. We hear about the problem itself, right? We're inundated by stories of doom and gloom, horrifying headlines and terrifying images that most of the time don't even exist. They're crafted images. They're photoshopped to create panic, to create fear. And when we're confronted by fear and panic, we run away, right? We feel conflict. We don't want to solve something. We become apathetic. Problem, fear, and conflict is a discourse that has permeated the discussion around climate and global warming, and indeed most of the challenges that humanity faces on this planet. And problem, fear, conflict, while important to understand the problem, important to identify the problem, and to maybe even have a little bit of fear because we can respond to that. But when the discourse is this is the entire paradigm with which we operate, this is a cauldron for apathy and indifference to the status quo. These are tools of oppression and not tools for transformation. We need to change the discourse entirely to move away from problem to solutions. We need to move away from fear to the possibility, right? Possible, what can we actually achieve? And we need to move from conflict to collaboration, because it's in this this recipe of solution, possibility, and collaboration that opportunities arise. Opportunities to create the future that we actually want. And we need to shift our entire way of thinking away from risk assessment to opportunity assessment, away from fixing and tweaking the problem to get a little bit better, to really creating the opportunity for the future that we actually want, to find those solutions and to work towards that vision of the future, not tinker with problems and fix things. So I lead a team of researchers and writers from around the world. This is just a smattering of some of them. And together we have mapped, modeled, and detailed 100 of the most substantive solutions to stopping and beginning to reverse global warming. Now, what I like to show with this picture is the sense of collaboration that we brought to this project. These are people come from all over the world. They're intergenerational. We have folks who are in their 20s, folks who are in their 70s. We have a diversity of disciplines brought to the table here. 50% have PhDs, all have one or more master's degree, but they're not just climate scientists or data junkies. Now, don't get me wrong, we love data. We can't get enough of it. But these come from a variety of disciplines. We have been approaching the problem, we're approaching the problem, the fear, the conflict, and the science from a perspective of climate, the atmospheric physics, data science, which is incredibly important, particularly in understanding the problem. But in order to find the solutions, we need to bring together humanity's brilliance from the many disciplines that are represented here. These are folks who are engineers, they're architects, they're foresters, they're people who are farmers, agricultural sciences, they work in transportation systems and energy systems. They are also climate scientists and some data scientists. They come from human rights. Lawyers, there are business people with business leaders. They come from all different disciplines to the table to find the solutions to the problem statement in front of us, so we can create the opportunities for humanity. And so what we have done is we've mapped these solutions. Here's just a smattering of some of them, or showing some of the solutions here. 80 of these technologies and practices already exist today, and when taken together, these existing technologies and practices can achieve drawdown, right? 20 of the solutions that we profiled in our book in 2017 are called coming attractions. These are technologies or practices that are on the pipeline, future innovations that when they come online are going to accelerate our progress, but they are not the silver bullets that are going to solve the day, nor are they available today, nor do we necessarily need them to achieve drawdown. They're going to help us, they're going to move us faster, but they're not necessary, and they are not sufficient in themselves. But taken together, the existing technologies and practices can achieve drawdown. So we need both innovation as well as really understanding what are the technologies that can help us today. Now, what do these technologies and practices all do? What do these solutions do? 3 core mechanisms that are essential. 1, replacing existing fossil fuel-based technologies with clean, renewable alternatives. Stop fossil fuels. Essential. 2, reduce consumption through technological efficiencies and behavior change. Okay, reduce demand. Right, live within our planetary boundaries. Do not overconsume. Restore. So restoring our natural carbon cycle, restoring carbon that we have extracted from the earth and put into the atmosphere. We need to restore that through multiple methods, but the only one we know today that exists that's tried and true, has had millions upon millions of years of evolution, is photosynthesis. It is the process of storing carbon in our plant's biomass and soil through this miracle and magic of photosynthesis, which converts carbon dioxide into plants' biomass and soil organic carbon. It's through a mechanism of these 3 mechanisms, and only through replacing, reducing, and restoring can we achieve drawdown. There's no other way to do it. So taken together, we can achieve this. Now, what are some of these solutions? Now, here is a list of 20 of the 80 existing solutions. Now, those of you who are familiar with the 2017 book, you may see things have changed a little bit. And that's because in 2020, about a month ago, we released the Drawdown Review, the 2020 review, which was a update of all of our solutions and all of our models using latest new data, changes in the past few years. We've combined some solutions, we've added new solutions, etc. And we produced 2 different scenarios, a scenario 1 and a scenario 2. And you can see there to the right of the slide, you see those numbers. That represents gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent that are either reduced or avoided from the Earth, entering the Earth's atmosphere, or pulled down through sequestration from atmosphere. And it's tallied up over a 30-year period from 2020 to 2050. And then there are 2 different scenarios. One is scenario 1 is aligned to a 2-degree warming scenario, and scenario 2 is aligned to a 1.5-degree scenario. So this gives you a range of possibilities that are ambitious, but that are completely possible, and indeed, one might say plausible, given the existing solution sets that we have in front of us. Now, the solution set itself is really eclectic. You see things like right at the top there, reduce food waste, other things that you may be more familiar with, things like utility-scale solar photovoltaics, or wind turbines, and you see things like insulation. So it's a real diversity of different solutions that are available to us. First thing that I want to point out with this list is when we think about climate solutions, kind of the first thing that comes to our mind is electricity generation. We think of those coal, oil, and gas fire plants that need to be replaced with renewable energy systems, and they're absolutely essential. But the thing to point out is that only 6 of the top 20 or the most substantive solutions relate to electricity generation, whether that's production or reducing demand of electricity. Now that makes sense if we think about roughly 25% of all global greenhouse gases comes from electricity generation. Where do the other 75% come from? Now, It also makes a lot of sense when you think about electricity that buildings and industry are incredibly important solutions as well. How we're producing our materials, how we're using materials, and how we're living in our homes, both our residential and commercial for work and for homes, which is now becoming increasingly combined because of the COVID crisis. But these building and industry sector consumes a massive amount of energy, both from the grid, right? So both using electricity, but also from on-site combustion. And so that needs to be reduced. And we have many solutions that are available to us to reduce our space heating and cooling, to reduce our lighting, etc. We also have something called, some of the most important solutions are how we handle refrigerants or hydrofluorocarbons, which are powerful greenhouse gases that leak from current equipment and enter the atmosphere. Now, it might not sound like much because, well, relatively a small percentage actually end up coming into the atmosphere. But hydrofluorocarbons are hundreds to thousands of times more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And when taken together, if we can reduce the amount of leakage and destroy those refrigerants at end of life, we can avoid up to 58 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent from entering the atmosphere. Now, if we phase out those refrigerants, in addition to reducing the leakage, if we phase those refrigerants out and adopt natural alternatives, which exist today, we can up to 43 to 51 additional gigatons of never entering the atmosphere. So taken together, that's over 100 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent that can be avoided from entering our atmosphere just from how we manage our refrigerants, which are used in our air conditioners and refrigerators across the world to keep our buildings and environments cool and our food fresh. So they're really important solutions. And I just want to pause here for a second and just note that carbon dioxide equivalent, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, simply refers to the conversion of different types of greenhouse gases like methane, like nitrous oxide, and in the case of refrigerants, fluorinated gases, to convert them to the equivalent of their global warming potential of CO2 or carbon dioxide. And that's important to do so that we can compare these solutions as apples to apples to apples to apples. But moving on, one of the most exciting and really interesting and provocative, I think, conclusions of drawdown over these years has been the impact of food systems. Now, many of you may not, the impact of food on the climate may not be immediately apparent to a lot of folks. But if we think about every drop of oil, every seed that is produced and going through the supply chain of our food systems, it becomes pretty obvious, right? We think about all the emissions, all the energy, all the labor to produce food in terms of production and agriculture, the harvesting, the processing. So think about how we actually make our food into the goods that we have today, goods that we have in our homes, packaging our food, all the tin, all the factories that are churning out emissions by producing the tin, the plastic, the glass, the cardboard that we package our food in, put onto trucks, put onto boats, and in some cases, sadly, for luxury commodities, put onto planes to fly all over the world to meet our consumption demand. All the while using refrigerators to keep that food fresh and frozen as it goes through the entire system. So all of those refrigerant gases are being used. And then it enters our markets where they overstock our markets to make sure that with beautiful produce, right? Because of consumer demand. Assumed consumer demand, that consumers will only want to purchase beautiful produce, and overstocking it so that consumers, when they come to grocery stores, feel that their grocery store is plentiful. We all know, we've all experienced that. But when it then goes to our homes, we purchase our food, we drive it home, sadly, and we turn on our gas or electric stoves, if we're lucky, living in a high-income country, or if we're not so lucky, living in a less and least developed country. Too often, folks are using cook stoves for burning of biomass, which produces noxious fumes as well as contributing to global warming. They're terrible for human health and well-being. And sadly, 30 to 40% of all that food at the point of consumption ends up in a landfill, not even eaten. where it decomposes and emits methane. Methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas that is 34 to 86 times more potent than carbon dioxide, depending on what time scale you consider important, 20 years versus 100 years. Taken together, when you see this as an entire system, as you trace that drop of oil or that seed throughout the supply chain, it becomes really apparent that the decisions we make every day about how we produce our food, what we're producing, and how we consume that food are perhaps the most substantive decisions that every one of us as individuals can make every day, that companies can make every day about how they're supplying food for their employees, and businesses can take direct ownership over, depending on how they're are also serving food and providing food to their customer base. So these are decisions that link the entire system together, and incredibly important. But we have to also remember that land use, how we are managing our existing ecosystems by protecting forests, our wetlands, and currently degraded land, essentially safeguards, expands, and creates new carbon sinks that directly draw down carbon every year. This is how drawdown happens, through our ecosystems that pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, convert it to plants' biomass and soil organic carbon, as I said earlier. And our natural sinks are the best solutions that we have available to us, whether that's restoring degraded land to, say, tree plantations to produce forest, to produce timber for our consumption, or using currently degraded land for forest restoration in the tropics, which you see is one of the most with a number 5 solution here. Or temperate forest restoration. These are incredibly important solutions, how we manage our ecosystems that have a series of cascading benefits to the planet, which include supporting our biodiversity, improving biodiversity, etc. And what I think is really super duper interesting is that when you combine land and food together, the decisions we make about how we use land, how and why we're using land, together are the most impactful set of solutions that we have readily available to us today to solve the climate crisis in front of us. And this fundamentally shifts traditional thinking and climate action away from energy, energy, energy only to energy and land and food and the entire system. Now, that doesn't mean we can ignore energy. 100% renewable grid is essential. We need to have net zero or living buildings. We need to change the transportation systems. Absolutely. We need to turn off the spout before we clean up the atmosphere, right? But we need to do them both in parallel to achieve this system of solutions. Now, I'm going to quickly go through this because I think this group, this audience would be is particularly interested in some of the modeling things. I won't go into great detail, but I wanted to just kind of describe how we do this, how we come up with these numbers. And we have a bottom-up, solutions-oriented system of models that are internally consistent, that are integrated as a whole, so that we have common methodologies that are used to evaluate markets of functional demand, looking at agroecological zones and thermal moisture regimes, looking at consumption patterns on a per capita basis in every country in the world, and even that look at our ocean dynamics so we can evaluate marine-based technologies and practices. And we have to remember when we think about all of these solutions, we have to think about them as a system. I don't want to go into great depth here, just to kind of give you a quick overview here. When we integrate each of these sectors, like land use and food sector here, we know that they exist within specifically defined boundaries. So we have to look at these constraints and real world boundaries of what are our land types, how much land is there, what's the current status of it, and what kind of solutions are actually practices are applicable on that type of land. We have to integrate everything together so that we avoid double counting, so that we deal with interaction effects and system dynamics, and we maintain the real world boundaries so that we're not extrapolating beyond what is actually possible or realistic. So everything is integrated and mapped together. No solution exists in isolation. And when we integrate the sectors as a whole, we see everything is interconnected. And indeed, what drawdown is a system of systems. Food systems, electricity, buildings, industry, land use, transportation. And of course, when we talk about health and education, or access to voluntary reproductive health clinics, freedom of choice, devoid of persecution, equal quality and access to education for boys and girls for 12 to 13 years of schooling. This affects the entire system as a whole. Everything is integrated together. And so we have to remember when we're working in and envisioning that regenerative future that we want, we have to see the integration of all of human activity as one big system that all affect each other, because that's the reality of the way we operate as a species now. So, I know I was short on time. I'm sorry if I've gone over. I rushed through that. Happy to answer some questions a bit later. But one thing I want to pose to you, is drawdown possible? Now, the answer is yes. And I think I alluded to this a little bit earlier. It is possible, but it's only possible when we adopt the system of solutions taken together. Every single solution, I should clarify, we have 76 solutions now in the new review. All of these solutions, when taken together in parallel, can achieve drawdown, and only when they're taken together can they do so. And the great thing about this, so my point here, I guess, is there's no silver bullets. None of these are silver bullets. None of them can do it on its own. You need them all. But the great thing is that we want these solutions whether or not global warming was even a problem. Right? Let me repeat that. We want all of these solutions whether or not global warming was even a problem, because they all have cascading benefits to human and planetary well-being. Now, I'll go over this quickly here, but if we think about renewable energy systems, this results in clean, abundant access to electricity for all. It reduces air pollution, improves health outcomes for children, health and education outcomes for children in least and less developed countries that are burning biomass and using kerosene for their cooking and lighting. So this is a win-win-win set of solutions. If we think about plant-rich diets and reducing food waste, this actually ends up producing enough food on current farmland to feed the world's population now until 2050 and beyond. This provides enough food and sustenance for the world's population. If we think about forest restoration or protecting our forests, this protects biodiversity, protects life on this planet. Its tangible benefits are truly incalculable. If we think about regenerative annual cropping, if we think about managed grazing and silvopasture, tropical tree staple crops, right? These bring carbon back to the land, improve soil productivity and yield, improve water retention, increase yield, benefit smallholder farmers and large farming operations alike. Right? These are the win-win-win-win series of cascading benefits that help this planet. And if we think about health and education, this is about human rights. This is about gender equity. This is about parity. It's about economic development for all people. It's about justice. And when we weave social justice, equity, and well-being for all throughout all of these solutions, we can see them through each and every one of them, because they all have those benefits. And how we implement these solutions to ensure that social justice and equity are embedded in all of this, that is how we get to a truly regenerative system and we solve the Sustainable Development Goals. By implementing a system of solutions, we can help to achieve the SDGs. And indeed, I challenge us to think about going beyond the SDGs to regenerative development goals. So let's solve these, let's get to that level and then go beyond, because sustainability itself is really challenging in terms of social equity and justice in a bounded planet. If we can be sustainable, sure, that's good as a starting point, but let's be regenerative. Let's expand the pie for all people. Let's create well-being for all and abundance for all. in connection to nature and avoid the limitation of just sustainability. But this is a discussion about debt, and so I think it's important to reference the cost that this is going to take to do all this. So we've done a financial cash flow evaluation that is pretty darn conservative, I must say, and for these two different scenarios. And we compared essentially two worlds. One world is if we didn't do anything, our baseline scenario, and one world and these two other worlds where we achieve a 2-degree warming or 1.5-degree warming scenario. And we did the calculation about how much it would cost to implement this whole system. And what we found is that the additional cost compared to what we'd have to spend anyway, it's about $22 to $28 trillion over 30 years. Now that's a lot. It sounds like a lot. But if we think about over $80 trillion of global GDP every year, this is less than $1 trillion a year on average to achieve this. It's really a drop in the bucket. But more importantly, when we implement this system of solutions, we have a net operational savings. So this is how the difference between the operational costs, right? We have a net operational savings of $95 to $145 trillion over 30 years. And that's over a lifetime of these implementation of these solutions. So that's a huge return on investment of only $22 to $28 trillion. And what this essentially shows us is that this system of solutions, or this system of opportunities in front of us, in front of humanity to create this future that we want, is only a win-win-win-win-win-win-win set of solutions, because they're beneficial to our planet, they're beneficial to humanity, and they're, by the way, profitable if you're so inclined. I've never worked for a for-profit company in my life, but I know some people do. And it is essential to bring in the private sector to help us move this forward, because we all need to link arms and work together to build a regenerative future. Because when we adopt this system of solutions, we actually change the way we do business from a system that is inherently exploitative and extractive to a new normal that's by nature, because it's connected to nature, is restorative and regenerative. And we can do this when we link arms together across the world, across all different types of, across generations and across different perspectives, because we are the regeneration. No more generation X, Y, or Z, right? We are the next generation where we're all in this together, the regeneration. And I ask you all to link arms with me and with everyone out here to help further the regeneration in any way we can. And I'm really excited to hear how this Debt for Nature project can take root and help us move capital flows, or move capital into the solution space, and really promote nature as the essential, nature and our food systems and our terrestrial systems and our marine systems as really the most important set of solutions that we have for humanity and for this planet. So I
think that's phenomenal, Chad. And I wanted to just flag that we have a few questions that came up for you from the chat. And I wondered if you wanted to take just 5 minutes here to address any of the questions that were shared in the chat already. And I think it's an amazing initiative of Drawdown. I think this explanation adds tremendous clarity in ways that I'm grateful for on behalf of our community. So I wanted to just express that collective gratitude. But did you want to offer any commentary on the questions that were shared in the chat?
Sure. So I am so sorry. I just realized how much I just talked. Grant, Bobby, next time you can interrupt me. I'm a big talker. So I know I had 15 or 20 minutes. I just went to 30. So anyhow, so I'm just looking at some of these questions. Great to hear that some of you have been using the new report, and thank you for pointing that out. Slides, there isn't one for that slide, but just reach out to us. Agricultural lands can be combined with regenerative agriculture, agroforestry systems. Absolutely, the agroforestry is well represented as across a number of different kinds of solutions that we promote at Drawdown. Everything from silvopasture to perennial staple crops to tree intercropping, etc. And what we need to do when we think about agroforestry and agriculture, there are additional benefits that happen when we start thinking about implementing solutions in parallel on the same hectare of land. I think that's what you may be referring to. Absolutely true. In our system, we have to break them apart because there's not enough data to support the sequestration, the added sequestration benefit when you start to stack solutions on the same hectare. But most likely, that's going to increase your productivity, increase your soil organic carbon when you do stack those solutions. We, by intention, separate them out so we don't get into the business of over-exaggerating any one solution. But I think addressing Juan Ramos's comment there, it's certainly possible. Just wanted to and it's important to note that we need to reduce our meat consumption. And we talk about a plant-rich diet. It's not vegetarian or vegan. It's a healthy diet. That means reducing our overconsumption of every type of commodity, and particularly meat. And that means replacing our meat protein intake from animal-based proteins to plant-based proteins, and reducing our overconsumption in high-income countries, increasing our consumption in less and least developed countries to reach that healthy diet. And that's actually where plant-rich diet becomes a solution. What are the key blockers in your view, Lisa Bolton? So yeah, I think there are lots of key blockers, and first and foremost, let's be clear. There are the vested interests. There's the entrenched industries that are working to perpetuate the way they do business, and that obviously needs to change. And I think it will change in time. I think even those entrenched industries see and understand that it's sometime in the future that we're going to have to shift the way we do business, and they're just pushing their way of doing business as far as they can for the ease of and profitability, and that needs to shift. We need to actively advocate for them to shift the way they do business to move that future forward to now. That's one key blocker. I think another key blocker is understanding the specific solutions. When I talk to policymakers and people in industry, which I do all the time, one of the things that increasingly comes up everywhere is we know the solutions, but when you actually start to poke at it, they say, well, we know there's electricity generation, we know solar and wind. Or they'll say, oh, we know transportation, they'll say EVs. And they'll say, a few of the solutions, again, the silver bullet syndrome. And they know the contours of the solution areas, the sectors. They very, very rarely, almost ubiquitously, do not know the full set of solutions available to them. And when they start to see the list of solutions across all of these different sectors that are ready today, there's something that clicks in their mind, and they say, oh, wait a second, now I get it. I think we've been approaching this the wrong way by focusing so much on the broad contours and less on the specifics. And we need them both, and to be honest, we need them both. But I think that was one and remains one of the big blockage points in moving us forward. Again, the silver bullet syndrome is connected to this, and I think that is one of the big blockage points, is that we're always waiting to the future innovation and not seeing what's right in front of us. We need a mirror shining back on humanity about what we already know, and that's something that often gets ignored to the shiny object of a future that doesn't exist, the future technology that's not in front of us. Yeah, I think the third key piece is siloed thinking. Folks tend to work in silos, and we need to think in systems. And I think my sense, knowing Bobby and some other people here, that systems thinking is a key component in the way we approach things, but it's very, very rare for particularly people in across society. We've been focusing on such very specific expertise, knowledge, and that's important. But when it gets put into a silo, you get these walls that get put up, and we need to actually break those walls down, create bridges and the connective tissue between all this great expertise, and see things as a system and working in a collaborative space. So breaking the hierarchy and working in a distributed network is absolutely.
Sorry, wait. We got you. Someone accidentally must have muted you. Sorry, I didn't. There we go. Go ahead.
So moving from hierarchies to distributed networks is essential. And I think for the first time in human history, we have the actual technology to be able to do that, right? We can actually create distributed networks. And I think what you're doing today with through a hackathon is essential for that. That's kind of the nature of this collaborative work that we can do moving forward. And Drawdown, we are actually having other hackathons. We hope we can link arms with y'all and Bobby's work here to create a knowledge platform that takes all of the information, all the models, all the work that we've been doing in a integrated, online, super accessible, meaningful tool to folks. And we're going to be creating all kinds of hackathons and ways for everybody to get involved. And it'll be open source and free to all people. So I think that's
we share a solar punk aspiration, Chad, and I'll just share for 10 seconds that what you mentioned about real world solutions that exist today is something that we need to bring to scale to get to a solar punk world. And we honor that as the route towards systems change, is to imagine the future world building on all those real world solutions. So I think the work that y'all have done at Drawdown is truly an inspiration for our community, for systems changers around the world to reflect on how that connects to all their solution gaps that they see in the world. And I think that it's also a context that you've shared that's exactly the right narrative opportunity for us all to see what's possible with the presentations for the hackathon for Debt for Nature. And I think that we're going to have to transition to that part of the afternoon here, if that's unless you had any closing words before we wrap up for the day. With this section, I just wanted to say, Chad, it's that we've gotten several standing ovation comments from our colleague Saskia, the organizational co-host. So she shared standing ovation in the chat. So I just wanted to likewise applaud what you shared.
Yeah, Bobby and Chad, from Sustainability and CrowdDoing, obviously we see this just the start of the cooperation and collaboration with you guys. I mean, we do want to move forward going forward. So we just this collaboration, this hackathon doesn't end here. This is just the start. So and we welcome what you shared with us today, and what Bobby and CrowdDoing, and obviously we as Sustainability, we're the junior partner, we're the new guys on the block, but. And obviously we'd like to see you back in Europe as well. When after this crisis, we'll be meeting face to face. So can we? And obviously, Chad, I'd love you to make a conclusion and a sort of summary of where we go forward, and then we'll have to move on to that.
Sorry, Grant, you're breaking up for me.
Sorry, if you can just summarize, and then we'll have to move on with the hackathon. Unfortunately, we're running a bit late on time. So if you can you hear me?
Chad, any last words, I think, is what Grant is asking from before we wrap up the section. He's just inviting you to share closing comments.
No, I'm happy. Thank you so much for everybody's kind comments. And for those of you whose questions didn't get answered, feel free to email research@CrowdDoing.world, and we can respond to them. There are some other great questions out here from the crew. And just good luck with today. I hope the hackathon goes really well. And thank you, Grant and Bobby, for having me here. And I look forward to continue to collaborate. And anyone on this crew who wants to collaborate on the Drawdown platform, in addition to the Debt for Nature, reach out. We'd be happy to have you.
That would be phenomenal. So grateful for everything you've shared, Chad. Thank you so much. Excellent.
Bye, all.
So on behalf of CrowdDoing.world and Sustainavistas, I'm excited to transition us to the next phase of this hackathon. Just to share for 20 seconds of summary, the Debt for Nature intersects with some of what was just shared, for the reason that if we are able to leverage the need for climate change and the need for regeneration, that might be able to get some of these themes and theses of Debt for Nature that have been percolating for decades to closer to the scope and scale of our challenges. So I want to acknowledge that and reflect that I think that this is an exciting moment. Are there words from our co-organizers before we transition to the teams? Let me see if Grant or Bruno want to add commentary before we begin with the teams.
Yeah, obviously, thank you very much and for everyone for joining us tonight, late on a Friday night, and it's been a long week. And Bobby's done a superb job of hosting all these three sessions and bringing us board. I think for us, we'd like to recap with Wayne Fisher on the Monday night, and with the Debt for Apes, the orangutans in Sumatra, and also the lemurs in Madagascar. And like we were saying, and there's some other actual interesting projects going forward. We see this just the beginning of this journey. So yeah, I'd like to welcome you all. And at the end of this, we just want to have a quick shout out. I'll put a Zoom link in at the end at 8:30. We'd like just to pop out for 5 minutes to have a quick team photo, so everybody is on board. We could just do a big block photo to say hi to everyone for Skoll, and we'll put that all on the social media, and hopefully you can all share that with your networks, and obviously we can go forward to the next one, and looking forward to it. Thanks very much.
Bruno, any other words from on behalf of co-organizers? No. Okay. So let's see the sequence of teams. We have in terms of folks who are the team that was ready, the first one on the schedule. We had the team unbanked, and we had team. Grant, did you want to hand over to the correct team? I can also support
Hermes.
that.
I thought it was Hermes, right?
Team Hermes first.
Lisa Bolton, right?
Am I on first? Fabulous, fabulous. And I see we have Alejandro that's joined the meeting. So very happy to see his name come up there. It was very much a collaborative effort between the group. So let me just see if I can present, see if I can figure out how to share properly.
En cambiar su cepa en 2 semanas, el enfoque de vacuna es absurdo.
I hear a background radio on here.
Okay, encima.
Okay. So let me know when you can see my screen.
Yes, I can see it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay. So yes, thank you all very much for giving us this time, and thank you so much to Grant and Bobby and Bruno for all the organisation for this week. It's been fascinating. I think a lot of us weren't sure what to expect. Certainly my first real hackathon, so it's been a real great experience. A lot more efforts than I expected, I'll be honest, but well worth it, definitely very valuable. So we started work on this idea of looking at the role of the private sector within the context of debt for nature. Our team is called Hermes. If anybody would like to know why, let me know. So we have Alejandro, Claudia, myself and Lisa C, Marina and Yangbo, but we had some other inputs as well from people. It was extremely interesting, the discussion, just in the last 2 or 3 days. So I think many of you are aware of the situation and the whole 6th extinction that's happening. Looking at as much as 30 to 50% of all species extinct just within our lifetimes. So this is the huge challenge that we face. This slide, so thank you to Alessandro for this, because this is really interesting and quite shocking, to be honest. So you can see the top figure there, the global nature needs of somewhere around $750 billion US. The harmful subsidies figure is just outrageous. So you can see there's somewhere around 550, $600 billion that are being put into fossil fuels, agricultural production and fisheries that are actually causing some of the damage. And yet only somewhere around 140 billion of biodiversity financing. So here, I won't go into full details. I'm not sure how long we have to go through. So
you have time. Please feel free to take your time. We're not too rushed. Please, I want to make sure that you have a chance to present.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Bobby. So this is sort of a general overview of the key points of biodiversity finance. So including private and public financial resources, and 4 key areas that it focuses on. One is avoiding future costs. And this is examples of taxes on harmful products or fines. So this is really the stick. And then the second one is really about delivering superior results. So this is really the carrot. This is the incentives. Then obviously there's a big focus on generating funds, focus on these areas. And then the last point around realignment. So as we saw in the previous slide, there's a big realignment needed between where we're focusing our input on damaging industries or activities, between where we want to try and shift that. In this slide deck, I've added in a link to a short video on what is climate finance. So we'll make the slide deck available afterwards, but you'll be free to look at that. I won't go into detail now. It's quite high level, but it's a neat overview. So just looking at our concept, so this is the what, and then later we'll come on to more details on the how, which is really more of the details of the financing structure and how we could bring that, how we could make it happen. So the basic concept for our group was trying to understand how we could bring together the expenditure that's already planned by a lot of multinational companies over the next few years. So just to let you know, I'm working at Nestle, and so I'm involved in discussions constantly about the different interventions that they've got ongoing in all the different areas. So they're looking to reduce their emissions, but they also have a pledge on biodiversity and water usage, helping with poverty, etc. So they are putting together now projects, different interventions that build on the work they've been doing so far, but really take it a lot further. And it just seems to make sense that if we can try and get extra value out of that money that's being spent by also reducing the debt that some of these countries, which are the highest impact in terms of biodiversity loss, climate change, and also high foreign debt, that we could potentially, as vegans like to say, feed two birds with one stone. Okay. So we have got a good list of key benefits for the debtor countries and the multinationals. So I'll just have a quick look through these. So the debtor countries, obviously what they've seen so far, what we saw very well in the Seychelles example was the reduction of the overall debt, better interest rates and repayment terms. The idea is that it helps them to get out of that that hole of debt that they're in. But the added benefits in terms of involving multinationals could be that they actually get a lot of help with the purchasing power, specialist knowledge, long-term commitment of those companies as well. For the multinationals, you might think, well, why would they want to add in, if they're going to spend the money, why would they want to add in this additional layer? When we talked about the Seychelles, it was mentioned that having this national commitment led to greater stability and security and success of the projects. So you're not dealing with private individuals, you actually have a contract with the government or with national agencies. It could help also getting access to some of the local services and things like planning permission. So that was potentially one of the extra benefits. Funding may be higher, and we'll see. Hopefully, we'll get a chance to look at the video on forest example that we have. So instead of a company putting in 1 million, they can combine that funding with extra grants, other companies, and other authorities to actually get more for their money. Plus, there may be currency conversion and tax advantages for them. And it seems that debt can often be bought at a lower cost as well. So it looks like they could also get extra value for the same investment. But then there's also a big benefit around brand reputation and improving their license to operate. It can be used in their marketing engagement with customers, and they could even use it as a direct means of engaging with customers through something like a green wallet. So we see lots of benefits for the multinationals as well. Oh, sorry. Right, I went to the end by accident. 1 second. Okay. For the local communities and small and medium companies that are involved, for them we would see greater access to reliable funding. So we'd hope to put in place quite a simplified, standardized funding mechanism. that would help the people that really need the funding to get easy access. And again, preferential rates and payment terms. We would hope to see a kind of snowball effect with the local economy in terms of employment. So that will ripple out effect into local businesses, but also into public services, education and health. And overall, they would then have a better protection from the threat of climate change and the loss of their biodiversity. They may also then have access to specialist knowledge from the multinationals as well, for topics like agronomy. For the NGOs and the conservations, the involvement is clear because it's a good source of funding. Access to the purchasing power and the expertise of the multinationals, and hopefully again we might see a snowball effect once we get a mechanism up and running. It might also provide links through the multinational between the NGO and the end consumers or the customers. And for the creditors, the ones that are currently holding the debt, we see the reduction of the high risk debts. Of course, there are a whole list of risks around the whole concept of debt for nature in general, but also with regards to the involvement of private companies. The main one that we highlighted was potentially the authorities don't provide the cash that's needed. So if they're not able to pay back their loans, then there's potentially no guarantee they're going to invest in the sustainable projects. But this is where we can use risk analysis before commitment. So really understanding the level of engagement and the priority for those countries that we work with. Making sure we have robust contracts in place. We'll see later in the how, we're talking about the pay for success. And obviously there's a role for insurance companies to play. The transaction cost can be high, process can be complex. So we would want to simplify that obviously as much as possible. And we may also be able to have the advantage of the experience and the expertise within multinational companies. So I know within Nestle we have treasury, we have departments that deal with hedge funding, currency rates. There's a whole set of expertise that they could potentially draw on within the multinationals as well. It could be seen as negligible overall debt relief. So when we look at the example for Ghana, the amount of debt versus how much we're looking at in terms of investment could be seen as small. But if you look at it in terms of on-the-ground cash flow and improving the overall credit rating, then even the millions versus the billions can make a difference. And the idea would be to build momentum. So as I mentioned, this kind of snowball effect. There's a suggestion that maybe nations might want to try to get their debt forgiven rather than actually committing to further expenditure. So we would try to target nations who are focused on internal funding for those sort of sustainability goals. And we should also try, if we can, where there are mechanisms in place to forgive debt, if we can link them to this kind of solution so that we get double value. And multinationals may be reluctant to participate because of their lack of experience and the high risk involved. So we would really try and come up with a simplified process, try and pair the interests of the multinationals with the different projects that are out there, the different needs that are out there, and start with proof of concept and then pilots to prove the benefits, improve the mechanism, and make sure we have something that works to build up that trust and that confidence. So this is an example of what we could potentially look at. So Ghana is a country, as we know, it's made a lot of progress in terms of sustainability, renewable energy, etc. They have a huge foreign debt. They have huge cocoa production, which is at risk because of climate change. And I was quite upset this week to hear with our risk management team internally that they saw one of the knock-on effects being that cocoa producers would need to move to higher altitudes, which would lead to greater deforestation. So loss of biodiversity at the same time. So an example would be a debt for nature swap with a pay for success contract for sustainable cocoa production of 5 million for 4 years. So that's the kind of thing we're looking at. Alejandra, would you like me to go through, or would you? I'm really happy for you to speak over this if you're still with us.
You're on mute, Alejandro.
Do we still have Alejandro in the call?
Yes, if that's Alejandro Del Mar.
Yes, yeah.
Alejandro, you're on mute. Okay, I can't hear Alejandro, so if you'd like to continue, Lisa, I'm sorry.
No problem at all. So this is a great overview from Alejandro on the debt for nature concept, and some really interesting figures on, for example, the debt for nature swaps, less than 0.1 billion to 0.15 billion in 2019, but huge potential for growth. So far, it's really been focused on public financing. As it says here, 80% of global expenditure has come from public financing, but people are starting to understand, private companies are starting to understand the role of private capital. And so there's a whole range of finance instruments that are available, like green bonds, environmental impact bonds, sustainability linked loans, etc. So there's a great background here on so this is the background here of this debt for nature, the sharing that's, let me just skip through. I'm trying to see which points to pull out. So far the impact has been relatively low. So it's been focused really on developed nations' foreign debt and not looking at other sources of debt. So you can see 2018, the total debt was for developing countries was almost twice their combined GDP. So huge figures that we're talking about. But what we wanted to look at was looking beyond the traditional accumulated foreign debt relief, and merging it together with other tools that exist, financial tools that exist. So you can see there's a huge amount related to COVID-19 that's going on at the moment. Different fiscal and monetary stimulus that are being put in place. Financial help being asked from the IMF. And what we wanted to try and see is how we can try and simplify and standardize some of these existing mechanisms so that they can bring more value during this time. So it's very much a time of upheaval. I won't go through the details of the investments here. You can see, as just an example, an average of 3.7 trillion in infrastructure investments needed every year through 2035, just to keep pace with the GDP growth. So I just want to, if this will work, so fingers crossed. So this is a great video that illustrates well how the different players can work together on this sort of pay for success. So I just want to play this first.
We could also share a link so people could look at that in the background thereafter, if that's if that would be helpful as well.
It's 3 minutes and it's a nice illustration, but if we're short of time, then we can include it it's in the slide deck.
Yeah, I think it's just that we want to give a chance to Yangbo next to present, and so I just wanted to let you conclude the rest of what you wanted to share, and then we can do so. But I'm happy for folks to watch the video, and if we share it if we have the slide deck all shared to Slack, that's helpful for all the groups actually.
Okay. So basically, There's a whole detailed sort of assessment of how of what the pay for success model is, which is basically investment based on results. There's the pay for success contracts tie payment for service delivery to the achievement of measurable outcomes. So obviously the outcome needs to be reviewed and signed off by an independent party. And then you also have an environmental impact bond, which is related to fixed amount borrowed and guaranteed to repay. So the idea is that we have this pay for success model, but on top of this, so you can see here, you've got the pay for success model at the bottom, which is drawn out. And then the very top part, this is where we've sort of laid on top of this standard model, the debt buyback. So it's sort of combining two different systems here in a way that could potentially lower the risk for multinationals and for those investors, make sure that they get the return that they're expecting, and at the same time then reduce the debt for whoever the holder is, whether it's a nation or it could potentially be a group of people like a farmers cooperative. Okay. So this was the challenge that we were set. Can we find a simpler, faster way to forgive and restructure debt while regenerating nature? And can we scale and apply systems change principles to bring debt for nature back into focus and on the agenda for the now slightly postponed COP26? So we believe that we have met your challenge. We have been rethinking debt for nature swaps in combination with innovative newer financial tools to increase attractiveness for corporates in the private sector, starting with smaller concrete projects within multinationals, within supply chains and scale based on robust national partnerships, increasing the private sector involvement, and changing systems by building reliable, trustful, national, private, public ecosystems. So these are our next steps. So investigate the feasibility of pay for success models with debt for nature mechanisms. Explore interest within the large multinationals across different industries. Work with local governments, NGOs, investors to decentralize transactions at the local level. Develop models for pay for success contracts for different sectors so that we would tailor them to the different industries. Research local projects which may be good candidates for matching with multinational investments. Start with a proof of concept and pilots before industrializing the model, and look how we could scale up the impact for local communities. So we want to try and make them self-sufficient and independent.
Phenomenal. Grateful for your presentation. I want to see if we want to take a brief set of questions, and then we're going to have our next presentation begin. So are there any immediate questions? And if there's not that come to mind, we can transition to the next presentation. But I think it's fascinating. Juan asked a question. Would you like to see that, Lisa?
Yep.
He asked, how do you see the role of partnerships working here? What are the key stakeholders?
So I wish I could have shown you the video. So basically, I mean,
My apologies.
No, not at all. It's just it summarizes it really well. So it's basically, it could be any number of partners. It could be on a very small scale, directly between an NGO, an individual company, and a team on the ground. So within a government working with local communities. It could be wide-ranging, involving a number of different research institutes, NGOs, conservation trusts, a number of different companies that all have the same goals within one or several countries, but focused on a specific industry, for example. So really, it could be a wide range of players. I think we would want to start very small, though, test it out before scaling up.
Thank you so much. I think that Yangbo and Tanuja are ready to present, I believe. And is that correct, Yangbo and Tanuja? It sounds like from the chat. And if not, we have. Go ahead.
Yes, correct. And Tanuja, you're ready. You have the slides up. Or actually, I sent this to Bruno. So Bruno, are you able to access the document?
Bruno.
Oh, right. Tanuja, right. So you're up. Good.
Great.
Yep. Right. So here, so just to breeze through this, since some of this has overview for you. So mainly that you may have been hearing in the press lately about calls, especially in North America, Canada, United States especially, for bailing out the oil and natural gas sector. And then the focus question is, well, we can structure that so that this bailout actually accelerates green transition, not only by phasing out the spent wells, but also to employ erstwhile oil and gas field workers to restore these landscapes. And what we did, so just, can you just scroll down, please? Yes, so here we're focusing on several of the sustainable development goals, and you can get the data from the references as well. Now, I'd like to focus a bit on the action steps, a bit further down, would be engaging various stakeholders here, given that what we're trying to do is to make it structured so that it's equitable. So for example, let's say you're buying out the equity, buying out the debt of oil or shale oil, shale gas driller. Of course, so you restructure it to be an equity swap, give common equity to existing shareholders, often banks, who are just intermediaries for ordinary savers and pensioners, and also to indigenous peoples, community members in the affected regions, that they could get preferred shares, so they actually have some say over direction of where these regeneration trusts go. And then down the line, it's to gradually replace the income from oil and gas drilling with regenerative activities. And they can be a wide range. It could be things like ecotourism, it could be regenerative agriculture, it could be wind and solar power generation, all that. And go down to the, scroll into the takeaways, please. Yep, and generally the key takeaways are number one, figure out what's the potential for value capture. For those of you not in the know, value capture is using appreciation of land or property value to finance an upfront infrastructure upgrade. So in this case, the infrastructure is, of course, nature, and you're upgrading it by restoring it. So what would then be the effect on land values nearby? And when you repair, when you restore, you clean up those wells, what would then be appreciation? And there have been some studies, but they're far from generalizable given their very limited sample size. So there actually needs to be a lot more data to be collected right there. And then furthermore, what needs to be done is first, in terms of figuring out, so scale capital deployment, of course, it's going to be at least one, if not two orders of magnitude greater than what's in the past. That said, it's going to be at the scale that should be expected if we're really to move the needle towards sustainable development goals, towards any of those SDGs. And lastly, it's to ensure that no one actually gets left behind in this just and ecological transition process. So especially decent jobs, that was on the SDGs focus, and several of the others, restoring a habitat, being able to also forestall worst effects of climate change, everything else. So that's just a brief review, and very quickly, any quick questions at the moment?
Questions from the group for the presentation that Yangbo just went through? Questions folks would like to ask now on that? Happy to take a moment for questions on that. If folks have them, type them, or you can share them briefly. Are there any other concluding words you'd like to say, Yangbo, before we wrap up this presentation and then go to the broader symposium for the full discussion?
Well, just the last thing I would just recommend is think about scalability. And right now, I've been looking at all those nature swaps, and Alejandro has sort actually, yep, he has even presented plenty of just data about what the gap is, nearly 1 trillion of an investment gap needed to restore biodiversity. So think about what would be most scalable, what could scale to investment flows of hundreds of billions of pounds, euros, US dollars, Swiss francs, and whatnot. Those just be closing words. Just think about really scaling up by at least an order of magnitude from previous implementations.
I see that we also have a new question from the group from Juan Ramos. He wrote, you mentioned a possible focus on Alberta. What do you see as some of the blocking conditions that would need to be overcome? Yangbo or Tunisia? Go ahead.
Yes, so both Juan and Bruno could address both your questions at once here since they're related. But again, the big roadblock, of course, is right now the narrative around oil and gas. And for those familiar with politics in Alberta, given how a quarter of the province's economy is dependent on oil and gas drilling, that it's also understandably the hotbed of climate change denialism in the country. But that can be, of course, addressed through a narrative, obviously, about how it's going to ensure maintenance of jobs, decent work, and all that. That's really what to push on. It's the narrative. And the main mechanism would be, let's say we were acquiring the debt. So in this, the equity swap, how the mechanics would be, to Bruno and also to Juan, is you'd first, in that buyout, that whoever's holding debt, say the banks, representing, of course, ordinary savers in those regions, they would instead get equity in these natural capital trusts covering these oil and gas fields. And then in addition, there could be also premium, some additional cash injection to employ these oil field workers. They employ them 15 to 30 US dollars, Canadian dollars an hour, pay them living wage to restore these fields, restore them to a pre-drilled state so that you can actually generate the land value appreciation and the income from generative activities to fulfill the return on the new equity holders, be it the banks or indigenous peoples or community members.
Thank you, Yangbo. I see Tunisia also unmuted. Oh, and then Juan also asked to follow up.
Tunisia, go ahead.
Yes, maybe Juan wants to go first, and then I'll speak.
Juan asked a question for you and Yangbo, Tunisia, in the chat. I can read it if you'd like.
Yes,
Do you see this possible?
Yep, I see it.
Good.
Yeah, so yes, Juan, thank you for bringing up Texas. Yeah, that again, it isn't too different in the case of Alberta, since if you take Texas, again, it's a much more diverse of an economy now, Alberta for one. And secondly, if you take certain regions of Texas, say Western Texas, Texas Panhandle, those are far more dependent on shale and gas drilling. Couldn't even cover in state. And the flip side of this is that because there are alternatives, there may even be greater will to transition in Texas. It can go either way. Say you transition because there are few alternatives, or because of the presence of alternatives. Think in Texas, think the tech sector in Austin, for example, or healthcare in Houston, or financial services in Dallas. If there are these alternatives, then there's an argument made that transition may actually be readier if you have sectors willing to take up the slack in terms of economy.
Phenomenal. And last comments from Tunisia and you before we transition to the rest of the hackathon process and the symposium process?
Yes, so I'd like to suggest, the wonderful learnings we are finding from all of the presentations, that we, as a result of this hackathon, we come up with a framework of questions that all of the debt for nature type of presentations, the key points that we should structure ourselves. For example, financial inclusion, as well as retraining of forces after any kind of transition of this nature. So we create a list of key points that all of the Debt for Nature activities touch upon, so that we can learn from each other. Yeah. So loved some of the points from Lisa's presentations, and then this presentation by Yang Bo. We could combine some of the key points there and create a bigger statement, if you will.
My apologies. So I wanted to identify that this is very exciting to be able to see these presentations. I wanted to check in that we've got a goal of a little bit further discussion around this, and then Grant also wanted to host a photo session after we have the extension of the last discussions. But I want to see if there were other individual colleagues that wanted to present what their findings. I know Carl suggested that he had some individual findings, and if he's interested in that, or if there's other people on the line. I know there was another set of teams that also were interested in presenting potentially, but that it wasn't clear if they got to the point where they have conclusions. But I just want to take time, whether it's formally presenting or it's just informally sharing, to take the next 17 minutes to just share any learnings or findings or suggestions vis-a-vis the next steps for the future of Debt for Nature. Both CrowdDoing.world and Sustainavistas.org are collaborating on Debt for Nature. We can include folks in any other dimensions of what we're connected to around systems change from both organizations' perspectives. But on this particular theme of Debt for Nature, I just want to get a round of perspectives from folks. So who here would like to speak to what the reactions to today's sessions? I see multiple folks on the line. Is there someone who'd like to raise their hand or to unmute and offer perspective? Saskia, did you want to offer any perspective for the group? Or I see also Bonnie. Would you like to? Or are there other people that would like to offer any commentary just to presentations? What it? Go ahead, Bonnie.
Hi. Thanks so much for the presentation. That see a lot of great work has been put into it. I did a webinar earlier today about co-creating a systems change evaluation methodology. So yeah, we're in the process of designing a new framework to help break down the different elements of systems change. We're using the 5 R's framework that the USAID actually created back in the day, and I would really like to co-create this with the solutions here as well, or use the framework we're building to help you measure the social impact of your solutions. So thanks Bobby for hosting this space. I'm a bit tired, sorry, so not very eloquent.
No, I think that's excellent, and I think that we would welcome sharing in that regard. We have looked at leverage points for systems change as a framework to measure how much impact potential there is in addressing social innovation gaps that way. So we'd welcome all cross-reference. Going around the room for other feedback on what you've heard or what this experience has been like, or what thoughts this inspires on the content of Debt for Nature. Let's see. Saskia, did you want to speak to such? Or Sarah, Paige, I see, or Sanjay, if you're back. Or it says, let's see, who else would like to speak to what they've heard or offer perspective? I see Melanie here, if you'd like to, or go ahead. Other perspectives from folks on what they've heard today? Let's see. Go ahead, Tanuja, if you wanted to add that.
Just saying that I attended Bonnie's session earlier today. She has really grounded her framework in systemic thinking, and it would really, I think, help all of our D4N activities if we brought her framework into it for evaluation purposes.
I'd welcome that cross-reference, and I look forward to learning more and sharing more and discovering how we can bring the threads together. I think the systems change is a collaboration challenge, and if we can get the collaboration such that we can get enough leverage to address each problem and know that we're doing that in a self-aware way. Go ahead, Juan.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting players to like kind of bring into this discussion, who are always looking for these kind of new ideas because they tend to be a bit more old-fashioned, are multilateral organizations. I know a lot of them are looking at a lot of natural capital solutions and different ways of financing them. And this isn't necessarily something that I've seen come up very frequently, and not at the scale that they kind of can bring to the table.
I think that's a great thesis of new kinds of alliances that could allow it to be feasible, unexpected allies. We've looked at that as a theory of radical collaboration, who needs to collaborate that hasn't collaborated to make the impact potential possible. And I honor that as a intentionality and opportunity for collective agency going forward. And I think that's fascinating. Thank you so much.
Can I ask a follow-up question to
Go
that
ahead.
point just made? Your comment there that this sort of consideration is not usually taken. Could you expand on that? What do you mean, debt for nature specifically?
Debt for nature swaps. I think that environmental bonds is something that comes out, but the impact and the measurement that goes around that isn't necessarily that reliable, given that the frameworks that they use for measuring and evaluation aren't the best all of the time, and like they have such global operations that it's difficult for them to actually follow up in a way that's actually tangible. So yeah, basically that.
So do you think that a debt for nature swap type of a product is more either reliable or measurable?
It can be, depending on how it's operationalized. The thing is that environmental bonds as a whole, they aren't necessarily screened for their long-term impact. Some of them aren't even screened for climate-related transitional or physical risk. So they tend to go into, for example, I don't know, operating energy operations, generally renewables, but many of these aren't even like screened to like the place where they are if they're at physical risk long-term because of climate change. So that's kind of what I'm referring to. Bringing in different concepts and different players into these kinds of bonds, kind of like following on what Lisa said, I think would be incredibly interesting to find, that public-private partnership approach that is always kind of said, but never actually trickles down to natural capital.
Yeah, good points. Thank you.
Other sources of commentary within this group on what we're discussing here around debt for nature. Other folks that would like to share perspective based on what they've heard. Is there perspective? Let's see. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing that. We welcome both the folks listening and participation and collective creativity. I support that process and the diversity of disciplines and diversities of ways of engaging with this content and creatively coming together. So I would like to see, so folks who are on the line who'd like to share, let's see, Sanjay, did you want to share perspective, or river flows, or this Paul, McConkey, Nicole, Melanie, Megan, Marilyn, who would like to share perspective before we adjourn? I just would like to let us get a chance to get folks who haven't had a chance to offer perspective, and we'll then ask the presenters one last set of feedback on the experience and suggestion on next steps if we've not got other feedback from the participants. Carol or Caddy or Claire, would anybody would like to share additional perspectives in terms of what you thought from Debt for Nature? Okay, let's go to the photo then. Grant, do you have the link for the photo?
Yes, it's in there. Yeah, Bob, can we just have a quick conclusion, just to say thank you to everybody? I mean, we'll just 1 minute.
Let's do the brief wrap up, Grant. Then.
Yeah, that's cool. All right. So obviously, Bobby and the rest of the Sustainabilists want to thank you all for participating. It's been a really exciting journey this week, and we just see this as the beginning. And one of the ideas we want to do is to try to get to COP26 still. but also to move this dialogue further forward, and also some of the other projects. So we've actually got an incredible creative environment which we set up, and we see this as just the beginning. So so please keep collaborating and getting into Slack. And if you have any question, ideas, contact us, and let's just keep moving this forward. We're looking at least monthly, but maybe even more often. Bobby would like to do it fortnightly hangout calls to continue the discussion. And there's some other examples of Dead for Apes and Dead for Cats, and there's a whole host of other things we can do. So and outside that as well. I mean, Sustainavistas have got some other plans, but I really want to thank everybody, all the contributors, all the supporters, all the challenges that we've had this week. For Sustainavistas, we don't think this is a bad debut. This is actually our debut on the world stage. We're still a startup as far as NGOs go. And we really like to thank Bobby and the CrowdDoing folks, because I mean, you showed us the way. And let's go to the Zoom link after Bobby and a few other people concluded to take a quick team photo. Thanks very much, and see you later.
Phenomenal. So Grant, while I share one minute of catch up to wrap up, just share the link to the Zoom in the chat here, please. And I think that just to wrap up on behalf of CrowdDoing.world and Sustainavistas, to say thank you for your creative contributions throughout the week on the hackathon. We're going to keep the Slack channel on this aligned to Debt for Nature. Anyone who's interested in the CrowdDoing hackathons overall, we can share the Google group. We can, if you're interested in the other CrowdDoing projects, CrowdDoing.world, and if you're interested in Sustainavistas, they've got a website linked to here as well. But we're going to keep the Debt for Nature momentum growing over time. We think that systems change is feasible through these different kinds of themes, and I think this is the global collaboration that we need. What we're going to do is also share the video from today and share that on social media. And if you've shared your LinkedIn, we can copy everybody who's participated in sharing the videos from the week to try to share it with a broader community. I think it's phenomenal to get this creative collaboration happening. Lisa, did you wanted to share last? Let's see. Bruno, did you want to share anything before we transition to the photo? Bruno, did you want to share anything before we transition to the photo?
Yeah, actually, thank you, Bobby. It's just I would just like to acknowledge the effort that these teams have made throughout the week. It's been amazing to see. It was amazing to see the effort you have put into this. Even though we had the honor to have amazing presenters during the week, actually, in my point of view, you guys are the stars of this show. Your effort has been outstanding throughout the week, and actually is the main purpose of our presence here. And I would like to make that clear, my deep acknowledgement in behalf of myself and the whole hosting team. Thank you, guys. Thank you all.
These complex challenges are only possible if we collaborate across disciplinary lines. And we've got the link here. Is this the link here? Grant, the same link here?
Yeah, that's a Zoom. Yes, that's the one. Yeah, let me just link it up. I should be starting. That should be.
Are you live there? So for systems change, let's collaborate globally, virtually, and be socially interconnected. There's innumerable ways to learn how to change the system faster. I think we all learn better together. So I think that's part of why we're gathered.